All right, welcome back to the Hogtown Podcast. We have a guest. We have Reese Martin. I was actually thinking I should have asked you, what do you introduce by? I know you write about transit and transportation systems.
Yeah.
How do you introduce yourself?
Currently, dad.
Dad.
I am a dad.
The hardest job in the world. That's what I tell my wife.
Your
The
first?
hardest job in the world.
It is my first.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
That's exciting. How old?
18 months. Yeah.
Cool.
So I decided to retire from YouTube to be a dad.
That's right. You had and still have, but you were more active on a very popular YouTube channel, kind of reviewing transit systems around the world, but also like obviously a heavy focus here in Canada. And welcome to the show. We have a lot to talk about.
I'm very excited.
Yeah. So maybe one place we could start, because we talked about bringing you on, I think a couple of episodes ago, because we were reviewing the fast-track.to website that
Good
you
URL.
pulled together. Yeah, that's right. That you had pulled together. Jonathan English, who I know quite well, and a few other contributors. Identifying, first of all, something that I didn't know, which is that we have among or the slowest streetcars in the world.
Yeah, we're down there. We're battling it out with probably Tampa.
Yeah,
and some of these American cities that like built it as a sort of, we have a streetcar now.
Yeah,
so
with
bad.
no priority signals or anything.
Yeah.
And then there was further coverage of this initiative and the recommendations that you guys put forth by the Toronto Star. The Toronto Star, they might have pulled it from your stats, said that like our streetcars can be 15 to 50% slower than like comparable systems around the world.
Yeah.
Which sounds bad.
It is bad.
So maybe let's start there. Like, why are our streetcars so slow? Like, we're known for streetcars, but why are they so slow?
I mean, I think that the single reason is we don't care. Like it's just there's
not a priority.
Total. Yeah. It's funny because we talk about congestion so much, right?
Yeah.
And then we have mayor after mayor who's just like, well, the transportation system doesn't work. And so it's like, well, people drive because I'm a believer that people just do what's rational.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, they're not going to get on transit out of the goodness of their heart.
Well, it's funny. I think there was a clip last week or 2 weeks ago. Olivia Chow was talking about this like FIFA celebration coming to Toronto. And like she's like talking about the price and how it's expensive for families. And she's like, and they got to park their car. And then she caught herself and she goes, no, I mean, take transit.
Yeah.
Like,
well, this is like the
it's still like so deep in our culture as a city, right?
Is that I'm sure Olivia Chow actually drives. Like, I know she does bike sometimes, but I'm sure she gets in a car more often than she'd like to admit, right? So.
Because really what you're optimizing for is getting to your destination as quickly and comfortably as possible. Yeah. And sometimes that's transit, but not always, and maybe not in most cases.
Enough, right? When streetcars are one of these methods of transportation where if that's like the only option you have on the route you live on, it's the most unpredictable from a schedule perspective. Like the subway's relatively predictable. The GO train's relatively predictable. Buses, I think, have grown accustomed to like knowing how to get in and out of traffic. Streetcars are just they're just at the whims of traffic, right? So like you think it's going to take 20 minutes and it's 45 minutes later, you're still stuck at a red light.
Yeah.
Well, maybe let's go. Yeah, one step beyond. We don't care enough. What would we do differently if we did care?
So many things.
Yeah.
So a lot of the infrastructure we use for the streetcar system is either just mismanaged. So, for example, there was like reporting a few years ago that like the overhead lines, they were tracking all of like the assets in like on paper.
Yeah. Right.
So there's like that.
Yeah.
There is the switches they use, which are from like kind of the 1800s.
Is this when a driver gets out and uses like a pole?
Well, they use a stick when they're not powered, but even when they are powered, they only have one like little thing that moves, and so that it's old fashioned. It doesn't work as well. It's more prone to derailment and stuff. And so every other city, including in the US, has got to move beyond this, and we custom fabricate. I believe they have like a blacksmith, like custom fabs these switches.
The TTC blacksmith.
Yeah, so that I mean, like, great, that guy's got a good gig, right? Like job security forever. But
I'll probably interrupt on each step just to clarify. Why do we do that? Like, why don't is it
we
like
always have?
And is it so? It's because I guess it's like we've always have. Maybe there's like a Canadian content requirement for these things, or
I don't even know if it's that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's that they kind of we always have, and then they backfill excuses. So it's like, oh well, the other one we'd have to dig a bigger hole to put the bigger machine in. So we don't do that.
And as I understand it from reading a few of these things that you've posted or that you've been involved in, that leads to a requirement for streetcars to slow down while going through switches.
It's apparently that's not the thing. That there's a lot of debate about what causes the. I'm sure someone at the TTC has a really good idea of why they do it,
Right,
but it's like there's this kind of morass of reasons that they do it. But yeah, they slow down to a slow walking pace at every intersection, basically.
Yes.
And so why is it slow? Well, imagine if you're in your car and even when there's a green light, you go down to 10 kilometers per hour through every intersection.
Yeah. So that'll if you like amortize that over the total trip, it's a lot of slowing down.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like your average speed is just really low.
Are those the biggest reasons?
Those are big ones.
Yeah.
There's the signal priority as well, right? So that you show up at signals and they're red when they shouldn't be. It's the driving is super conservative, right? So when you're on a bus, you often notice the bus driver really they go fast.
Yeah.
We don't go fast on the streetcars. We've had like a long-term policy of kind of like slowing down, being more conservative, safety oriented, right? At the cost
even between intersections, we're not going
as fast as we could.
Okay.
100%. The doors on the streetcars are really slow. This is like a thing you'd care about.
They stop for a long time.
Yeah, and it sounds like minor, but it's like if you were really good at running streetcars, you'd be like, well, that's important. If the door takes a long time, then every stop we're waiting 10 extra seconds.
It stacks up.
All right, you got a trip of 100 stops. It's a lot of time.
Yeah,
right.
And I guess that's another one is how many stops we put on these lines, right?
So many stops. Our stops, we have twice as many on average as
comparable cities.
Yeah,
and that means like twice as many per distance.
Exactly. Okay. So it's just, I remember watching a video before I had moved to Toronto and I was like, oh my God, really? You're stopping again? Like, it's just almost like every block you stop, right? And we do this, as far as I can tell, it's largely under the guise of accessibility, because it's like, oh, like an old person, they can't walk
as far. Yeah.
Doesn't really make any sense because, like, if it's like an extra 200 meters, like you're going to get to the subway, you're going to walk down the stairs and you have to walk down it doesn't make any sense. The other reason is kind of like, it's maybe more something that housing people can appreciate. It's just that like people ask for a stop or they ask for their stop to not be removed and no one says no to them.
So there's political interference in these things. Yeah.
You look at like the spectrum of transit, let's say from like GO trains or commuter rail to buses, where buses stop almost every intersection.
Yeah.
And commuter rail stops every 5 to 10 kilometers, and subways stop every 1 to 2 kilometers. And it's like we treat these things like buses, but they should probably be closer to subways, right?
100%.
In terms of like,
but although as you mentioned,
you have now outlined a more coherent policy than the people in charge of running.
Well, it's actually worse than that because they don't even go as fast as buses. Because they're going slower between intersections and much slower through intersections.
They're big. They can't. They're not nimble like a bus.
They can't change lanes. I mean, this is maybe my question has always been, and this is maybe the defeatist attitude, is like, hey, streetcars suck in Toronto. They can't get better. Why do we have them at all? So, like, can you make a case for, because, there's places like Spadina, St. Clair, where there's dedicated lanes and like the infrastructure sort of makes sense. Yeah. There's places like Queen and King where it's just like, it's always blocking traffic because it can't get out of the way. It can't move into the right lane. And it's stopping too frequently and it's getting stuck behind red lights. So like, what is the case for streetcars optimistically if we got it right?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think transit systems run rationally or about cost, right? And it's just the operating cost of a streetcar per unit per person moved is just way lower, right? Because one driver can move like a much larger quantity of people.
Right.
Because they're electric, they last way longer. If you're maintaining them well, they'll last 50 years. A bus is like 15 years. So the life cycle is way longer. The infrastructure exists, so it's expensive. But then you get like, oh, you need less maintenance on the vehicle because the suspension's less sophisticated and stuff. So it's cost effective. You've got all that rail and stuff, all of this stuff you've invested in over time that exists. And so for that upfront infrastructure investment, you get a lower cost per person moved. And we move a lot of people on the streetcars. They move some. The most used bus routes, they move like twice as many people. I think they could move 4 times as many people, like they would if we were in Berlin or something. And so the cost, the benefit would be even more obvious then, right? Because it would be like,
and I would say they're marginally more comfortable
for sure
than buses.
Smooth.
There's less sort of like.
And I think that the biggest downside, as Matt mentioned, is the fact that at every stop they're blocking both lanes because you can't pass them while they're letting people in and out. But I guess that's just kind of inherent. And I guess they're always in the left lane because you need the turning radius.
Yes, but these are things that we could change.
But we also have parked cars in right lanes.
Yeah,
many parts.
But you're saying you could choose to like not have on-street parking on a streetcar line and have a tighter turning radius and keep them in the right lane?
Well, you could do a tighter turning radius. But for example, something you notice if you go to Europe is we always keep them in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
And so there's one example in Toronto I'm aware of. There's a couple, I think. But for example, when you're near the Loblaws at Carlton, the streetcar tracks spread apart, and then you have a left turn lane in between them. And so if you're willing to be actually go on the drawings and like, oh, we're going to move the track here. Context, then you actually can have it so that traffic functions a bit better.
Or you'll have the like stop.
And it's a little island.
And it's a little island.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And so but that requires like detailed, you got to like place by place.
Yeah.
And in Europe, they would do that. And we don't.
Right.
And part of the reason is because we have so many stops.
Right.
If we had less stops, you could make each one a bit better. Right.
Yeah.
So
because then the right lane can continue flowing while the streetcar stops in the left lane. Now with that sort of like framing around, like we have the infrastructure, it's cheaper to move people. Does that translate to like in net new places? Should we be building streetcars, or should we be optimizing because we already have the infrastructure?
I think that's a good question. I think that based on the cost it costs us to build things, no, we shouldn't build. But where at the margins of the network, I think it makes sense to extend it. So like the waterfront. Maybe not what I would have built, but I think like it's not the worst solution. I think like for neighborhoods that are adjacent to the streetcar network, like the Junction's really, it's a popular neighborhood, a lot of density.
Yeah, extending the Junction would actually
make a ton of sense, right? So I think at the edges, extending it, maybe there's some world where we get really good at it. And like if you look at Europe, like in the new neighborhood in Helsinki, they extend the trams, but the trams are way better, right? So I think before you start talking about expanding it, they have to fix it, and then
one thing that I like about hearing this, it's actually kind of like a positive story. I was on Bradford's policy committee for the last mayoral election, and I remember it was like we want to do something about traffic and congestion, and I was like, nothing but congestion pricing matters, and like for political reasons you don't want to go there. And then and the only other idea that anyone could come up with is like traffic wardens, which is like probably necessary, but
expensive.
Like we didn't even know like, and this was maybe a reflection of like me and whoever else was on this committee. There wasn't even this thought that there's this list of 10 things you could do
to make existing things better.
Yeah, they're individually maybe quite marginal, but like taken as a whole would actually move the needle quite a bit. So this does seem like the sort of thing that should be well received by politicians, like setting aside the cost, which is an easy thing to say, but like, again, in the grand scheme of things, like there are more expensive things than tweaking existing networks. Have you gotten any, like, have you noticed any pickup from the mayor's office or anyone in council or?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the mayor's office has actually been pretty receptive, and yeah, like a few councillors have reached out. Some not necessarily councillors that actually have streetcars in their wards.
Yeah, fair.
But yeah, like there's been some receptiveness. It puts me in an awkward position because I'm actually really happy. I think it's like all these mayors, like progressive, conservative, they sat on this stuff and didn't do anything, and it's like, okay, it's good that you guys are into this, but also like, why have we waited so long?
Well, this should not be sort of a
it should be a political thing.
Right? Well, what I'm saying is like, and maybe this is the blame lies with the TTC, and it probably does.
It does.
But what I'm saying is like one of the reasons why at least the political layer has waited is because nobody knows enough to like come up with the idea other than like you and John.
Which is it's crazy, right? Because like the TTC should and needs to be like a sort of entrepreneurial organization where they're like it's just hard to explain to people. You're running a thing, it's your thing, and you don't want it to just be as good as it could be. Like it's not, you don't have an aspirational vision of
looking at best practices around the world.
Some people do, right, in these organizations, but clearly the organization as a unit does not, right? Leadership doesn't seem to really care, right? And so, and I mean, it is a huge asset. When I look at like old Toronto, it's densely covered by streetcars. They're everywhere.
Totally. It's
perfect for a sort of like mid-rise urban form. It's got tons of capacity. Like a streetcar line running well has the capacity of like a 8-lane highway.
Yeah.
So you could really be moving a ton of people. You could be massively densifying these areas, making them really pleasant, but no one has the sort of vision, right?
And this has, all your recommendations as I read them have fewer political trade-offs to things like dedicating King Street, for example, like cutting it off the car traffic. There's this, there's always the like cars versus, transit thing. This not only is it like less of a political trade-off, it actually benefits everyone because like the flow of traffic would move quicker, including 100%. Cars.
Yeah, they're very like technical in nature, right? Some of these recommendations.
And if you have the streetcar moving faster, both like between intersections and through intersections and fewer stops, again, like all of traffic gets to move at that speed.
It is shocking to me that this hasn't been a political issue for a lot longer. Because I just remember, and I'm sure they still exist, but I remember these photos, particularly the King Line. If you lived in Liberty Village and you were trying to get to downtown, and you'd see these pictures of like 12 streetcars back to back just stuck.
Which it still is.
And now it's a dedicated road, and as I understand it, you still get that. You still get these like stuck streetcars on a road where cars are not allowed to drive. And I'm like, I don't understand how this stuff is not.
Is that just inherent in like streetcars being on rail? No.
It's part of it too is the way we operate, right? We're just the subway. There's like a lot more direct management of like, oh, those trains are too close together. We got to like call the drivers and get them to. In the streetcars, we just kind of let the drivers do whatever.
Yeah.
But so you've got like the responsibility of a sub because it's on rails. You can't get around it.
Yeah.
But we treat it like a bus.
Yeah.
And so it's dysfunctional. The thing is, though, this is like it's such a great asset because look at how much it costs to build new.
Yeah,
totally
like,
crazy.
Yeah,
right? Like if you were to build the Toronto streetcars today, right, and our cost for Finch West like 250 million per kilometer, right? It's like roughly 100 kilometers, right? 250 billion dollars for this, right? So it's an enormous asset that we just don't utilize.
Yeah, and one of the intersections that I think about that sort of like illustrates how ridiculous this like lack of planning is the King Street corridor starts at Bathurst when you're coming in from the West End. And at Bathurst, so every car driving down King up till Bathurst is forced to turn left when they get to Bathurst. Yeah. But the streetcars are in the left lane. And so the streetcars are stuck behind all these required left turn
And
cars.
that's where you would want to have the streetcar tracks, spread so that you could have a left turn in the middle. But it's like, but for us to make these changes is unthinkable.
And on this costing thing, like one way to think about it, I'm just coming up with this now, so maybe there's a better way. But like, if these changes could increase system capacity by 30%, that's like the same thing as like increasing the infrastructure by 30%, like running parallel lines or whatever. But obviously much cheaper. So if you amortize these costs for new lines on like a per rider per kilometer or whatever, like this would be probably the best bang for buck you could get.
I think the cost of this is basically zero too. I mean, because most of the things we're suggesting are just change the policy when you replace a thing.
So faster between intersections, faster through intersections, that's probably just policy. Removing stops, that's basically free. Faster doors, is that like baked into the spec
software? So it's like if you software, hardware. I mean, it's like when we just bought. So this is what's crazy. Right? We just bought 60 more streetcars.
Yeah, we should have.
Are the doors faster?
Doors.
Are the doors? Are there There's all these like things.
Yeah,
we had them for 10 years.
Yeah,
and we didn't. As far as I know, we ordered the exact same. Yeah, no real modifications.
Yeah.
So it's like if we were being competent,
nobody was looking at what could we improve.
Yeah, it's just like you already have this, right? For the switches and stuff. The reason I say it doesn't cost anything is because we rip up intersections all the time. We just choose to reinstall
the old thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say like the thing that would cost is like the switches and these like islands wherever they could fit. But if you just time them with road work, like existing road work, then again, like it's not.
You incrementally change the system over time by doing it that way.
This is great. They should definitely do this.
You don't need to convince me.
Again, like the thing that's actually hopeful about it is that this is all quite easy. Like some things are very hard to do, like building new subway lines. This is actually quite easy.
Yeah.
As I understand it, just to switch to the Finch LRT. Yeah. A lot of the lessons that should have been learned, the mistakes that I think, and you'll know better than I, the mistakes that were made on the Finch LRT seem to be that we sort of like took the streetcar model to a certain extent, like the frequency of stops, for example, as being like an obvious one that jumps to mind. Can we maybe dive into that project specifically? Like what was missed in the design of that line that now we're sort of stuck with, or what can be improved? Like I know they're making improvements on transit, on single priority as an example.
Transit City, it's really difficult for me to say this stuff, but I get the sense I'm in good company. There was this perception, and I'm not like a political person. I really do consider myself like an independent. But there's this perception that like Rob Ford came in, canceled Transit City, evil guy, and brought in his own political plan. But like Transit City was fundamentally also a political plan. Yeah. It was we like streetcars. There should be streetcars everywhere. Yeah. And so if you look at like the Finch West LRT and you squint, it just looks like the St. Clair streetcar.
Streetcar with a dedicated lane. Yeah, that's right. Like St. Clair.
Even at the station, it goes underground. It's like everything.
Yeah.
it's in the middle of the street. It's not on the side of the street.
Yeah.
Right. There's no ability to be creative here. So, I mean, it's streetcars.
Yeah.
And we made all of the errors that we make with the streetcars. No one seemed to ask like, hey, guys, like our streetcars everyone complains about them. Should we really build more like
and
this?
The pitch, because I remember this debate well, and I was very much on the Rob Ford side. The one thing I think Rob Ford missed, because really, like my understanding of the debate, there are a couple dimensions, but one dimension is grade separation versus not.
For sure.
I think one dimension that Rob Ford missed is you could go elevated and not 100%. Just underground, and one of the reasons why Transit City was like why the defenders of Transit City were defending it so strongly is because they thought it was much more cost effective, but when I look at Finch West, and again, this is maybe not perfect apples to apples, it's something like twice the per kilometer cost as the REM in Montreal, which is totally grade separated and therefore way faster.
Yeah.
So that, like, we didn't even save money. So like,
no, I mean, the cost thing, it's such a empty argument, because it's like, well, like, you know, you bought a BMW, don't you know that, like, you know, you I mean, like, yeah, okay, maybe you do believe that you wasted all your money, but it's like you're paying more for a better product.
No, but it's almost worse than that. Like,
it is worse.
Montreal paid less for a better product.
Yes. I mean, well, that's the thing, right? Is that interacting with the roads is expensive.
That's right.
Because these projects, they rebuilt all the adjacent roads well. Whereas if you build an elevated, your interaction is with poles.
That's right.
Right. So it's expensive in every way. And no one, when I arrived in Toronto, no one was even open to the argument that you could do elevated. It was like, oh, it's, you know, like,
well, especially in a place like Finch. Like, I understand why you don't want to do elevated smack downtown.
Yeah. Right. Oh, Finch is pretty desolate, right? You know,
it's desolate, and it's got these extremely large, wide right of ways. So, like, it would not like take away from the streetscape or like.
No, and I mean, the tram is not pretty. Yeah. You know, you go to Europe, and the tram, the stop is like, oh, it's like an architecturally designed. It's beautiful. The tracks have got cobble going up to them. You're like, oh, that's attractive. The tram itself maybe like has some weird design. Ours are so ugly. Yeah. At every stage of the process, I have been like, hey guys, maybe not gray. Yeah. Like gray is. Why? Yeah, like, why gray? Could you have any color besides gray?
Yeah,
right?
Like, at least the TTC streetcars are red. You know, it's like iconic, red and white.
There's some. Yeah. Like Toronto's famously like this colorless. Yeah. And we want to have. So it's just. Like seemed like no one was trying, right?
I think this idea of grade separation is just like totally underrated.
It's not understood, right?
One thing I like to say is that just as urban planners care about everything other than affordability, transportation planners care about everything other than like how fast it takes you to get from like point A to point B.
Which is the single most important thing.
And both these are like the two things that like people actually care about: how affordable is my rent and how fast can I get to work.
Yeah.
Like all you hear is about like road diets and these sort of things, not like how to get more throughput faster to wherever people need to go. And there's like even all these tweaks that we're talking about on the streetcar network, you're still contending with mixed traffic. Yeah. And you're contending not just with the physical limitations of that, but the political limitations of that. Like 100%. One of the reasons why we didn't have signal priority out of the gate and why there's still some resistance is because it comes at the cost of like cars moving faster. And grade separation, it's just like
eliminates that.
You're flying above or below and I'm doing my thing and it's just like a win-win. And why can't we take the win-win?
Well, that's one of the things that always frustrated me was this term LRT gets used. Yeah. Right. Which is it's a really bad term because if you look at what that means, it doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of different cities that totally different things, and
they're light, they're rail, and they're transit.
Right, and so you look at Calgary and Edmonton, and their systems are totally different. They're much more like subways because they will cross the street, but they'll have the gates that trains typically have, which means they get total priority. Yeah. Like trains come in, you got to stop. Train goes through at full speed. So, and what that means is they don't have to get the full grade separation. You know, the major intersections will do an underpass or something. So it means you pay way less than a subway, but it basically performs like a subway. Yeah. We paid way more and got a streetcar out of it, right? And I mean, it truly is the case that these are the highest prices paid for these things anywhere in the world. The Shepherd subway costs less per kilometer than the Finch LRT.
And was the decision for, again, like mixed traffic, like it's a dedicated lane, but just mixed traffic at intersections. Do you think it was just like it was actually like a cost consideration, despite the fact that everything went way over budget, or is there some like philosophical opposition to, let's say, elevated rail?
Well, I think there is a bit of that, but I also think that, like, let's be honest, there is interfering with cars is seen as a positive among a decent number of people, right? It's a The problem is that they're like, oh, it's going to make the cars slower. The problem is it makes the transit slower too.
It's another front in the war on cars.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, but at the expense of its own purpose, which is to move people quickly on
So it's
transit,
not just a philosophical opposition to grade separation. It's a philosophical preference for disrupting cars.
No one will say that, but I mean, like, let's be honest, right? Definitely. Yeah, like, because you could design it and have it on the street and disrupt cars less.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the design we chose.
They didn't do it that way.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and the unfortunate thing with these projects, like as obvious as it sounds, is that you get one shot at it. I mean, like there's things you can do that are like technical improvements, like signal priority. They're marginal. This piece of infrastructure is now built. Now we have to live with it for 100
years. Yeah.
And like all of the mistakes that were made in this, you hope, those mistakes get brought into the next project if that project ever comes.
Well, and the thing that's so sad is if you kind of look at it, it's like this was sort of a political cudgel. And now the people who legitimately, a lot of poor people, disadvantaged people along Finch are forever trapped with crap transit, right? Yeah. And so it's like forever, it's like, well, if you live on Finch West, you kind of want a car because if you're taking, like, I cannot emphasize enough to people, it's like 10 kilometers long. It takes an hour. I mean, I've heard it's gotten slightly faster. It is remarkably slow.
I've heard slower than the buses it replaced.
And the buses are not fast.
Which is like, you wonder how that doesn't get highlighted along the way. That the system we are spending tens of millions of dollars to build is slower than the buses.
They never communicated these things. I mean, people like John English and I were talking about the fact that it's going to be really slow for years in advance. It was, if you went on the website, you went to the console, they never mentioned the speed. No. There wasn't a Finch Express bus. Interestingly, there's express buses on all of the other streets. It's like, well, why? Because maybe it would have been way faster
than the LRT that we're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into.
Which agency made this decision at the time? Was this already Metrolinx back then?
No. So the thing people don't seem to understand, and I mean the city that's pretty, I think, disingenuous about this stuff, is it made a bunch of decisions and then kicked the projects. Well, maybe they didn't feel they were kicking them, but Metrolinx took over the project
with some constraints already kind of imposed.
Basically, the whole design and everything. So they were just
had already been set in,
and then they just had to build the thing, right? And so it was like they didn't. And I've heard that they actually, in some cases, tried to make changes and they weren't received. And I mean, one thing that seems frustrating to me is it seems like Metrolinx, despite having the power of the province, they don't really get to. The province is always gaming things out with the city. And so even where they could say, like, city, you have to do something differently and it would be better for everyone, they use it as like a chip to negotiate with, right? So it's like, you keep your crappy design.
But it does seem like, to your point earlier, is this that there's no vision or leadership. These are two bureaucracies butting heads with each other,
for sure,
with no clarity of like what is the objective that we're trying to solve for. And so you end up with these like compromises layered on top of compromises layered on top of compromises, which leads to costs and bad quality, right?
Yeah, and everyone in reaction to this thing was just like, oh, this is really bad. Like the politicians involved are like, this is.
But it seems to me like the mayor and the premier, and not to blame this mayor and this premier because many of these decisions were made before them. But it's like they get on this new transit line. There's this big grand opening, press release and video. And it's like both of them are unaware of what it is that they're about to board, unaware of how slow it's going to be, unaware of what decisions were made. And then they both walk away being like, oh, man, that was pretty bad. And it's like for our political leaders to not realize until after it's finished that it was poorly done is, probably
when we're building more of this stuff.
Right. Tell us about that, because like we did this, we made this decision on Finch West. We made a similar decision on the eastern stretch of Crosstown, where it kind of like goes up to grade. So maybe we could talk about that. Jonathan English had mentioned there were like alternative proposals that would have not led to that. My understanding of the Ontario line is that some lessons learned along the way are being implemented. It should be done relatively cheaper, should be done relatively quicker, and it should be a better end product. Like what are you seeing?
The Ontario line's great project. Cheaper? No. It's this is the thing, is what's really strange about the Ontario line is they did do the things that you would expect would make things better. But it's still costing a ton.
Like, what are some of those things?
So, like, so traditionally, our subways are like all underground for the most part. Like, there's actually a lot of in the old days, like the '60s era stuff. Rosedale and stuff's above ground. But the recent days, Shepherd and stuff, it's all been underground. Ontario Line, a bunch of it's above ground, etc. And yet, it's costing $2 billion per kilometer. Right? These are like crazy prices. Like other cities in Canada in recent memory have been paying like the REM you brought up. It's 100 million per kilometer.
Right.
In Montreal.
And it's mostly above ground, but still
a 20x difference. Yeah. Yeah.
20x.
And is that like how much of that is station versus tunnels?
So tunnels are not that expensive.
So stations.
It's the stations, right? You build it's the underground stations that are expensive, right? But they cut down like a bunch of the stations are above ground now, and yet
we're still spending $2 billion.
So my understanding on one of the reasons for this, and tell me if there's more, is for political reasons we don't like cut and cover. When you kind of like trench, excavate, and shore, and then just cover it up, because it's more disruptive for a shorter amount of time. It's more disruptive, so for political, and there's more dust and stuff like that. So politicians don't like it, which pushes us to tunneling. When you're tunneling, you have to consider the structural foundations of all nearby buildings, which means you need to go very, very deep.
Potentially. Yeah.
And that means your stations need to go very, very deep. You can imagine these kind of like runs of escalators going down. Is that like most of the reason why, or is there more?
That's a big part of it, is that, and it's also how you construct them.
Yeah.
So on the crosstown, for example, the tunnels were not cut and cover, but all the stations were cut and cover. Okay. And that's pretty typical for subway projects.
On the crosstown. Yeah. Okay.
Is that you do the tunnels, but then you find an open site where the station's going to be, and you just go straight down, build the station, fill it, backfill it, right? For Ontario Line, for at least the 4 central stations are being mined, and mining is kind of the
Which
most.
Which stations are these?
So that'll be Queen, Osgood, King Bathurst, and
mining meaning they're in bedrock.
They're in bedrock, but also they don't open the site above ground.
But Osgood on the north east corner does have a big pit,
but that's just a shaft. So the actual station structure will be a lot bigger.
Okay.
There's also a shaft on the southwest corner.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're going to go down, and then they're going to kind of like mine across giant underground cavern, shotcrete and stuff.
And are they doing that because they want it under the street, and they don't want to. Like,
they don't want to do cut and cover.
They don't want to do cover at an intersection.
At an intersection, you could make an argument. I mean, they're closing the streetcar already. It's already been closed, right? So it's
what are you really not disrupting?
You are the main thing I have heard is the N-Wave. N-Wave has a bunch of infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
But I think this might be a bit ideological. It's like disrupting anything old is risky.
The big structure at Queen and Yonge is right in the middle of Queen Street, right? It's blocking Queen Street, right?
Correct.
At Queen and Yonge. So obviously these things are interrupting intersections.
Exactly. So it is down to things like the path, the N-Wave tunnels, which are cool. But something that I've talked to others about is like, well, what if we just did it on Richmond Street?
Right.
Because the Richmond Street,
run the line on Richmond Street.
Yeah. Because once you go up the escalator, you'll be at Queen. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think
because the escalator runs
exactly. So I think it's one of those things where it's some mix of ideology. Like it's literally like it has to be Queen. It's a Queen Street subway. So, but even you look at the Bloor Danforth line, and it's north of Bloor and Danforth the whole way in the alleyway, right?
Yeah. You have these little parks and green pea parking all north of the shops on Bloor because that's where it's on. Yeah.
We are I think Matt Iglesias actually, he's like not that interested in this, but I think he had the perfect answer to all of like, why does stuff cost so much? No one cares about it. No one, there's just no incentive. No one is sitting there saying this decision and this decision.
Well, in fact, people care about the opposite. People care about adding requirements because it creates more contract work, more consultants, more
100%
complexity. And so the only people who care are the ones who want to drive the cost up.
Yeah, and there's who's doing that, right? Yeah. The province doesn't seem to be doing it because the projects keep getting more expensive. To give you an example of the levels we're going to with this project, if you go to a bunch of the station sites, you'll notice there's these sheds, these giant. And think of how much that struck. Like it's not like a hoarding; it's a serious structure.
Steel. It's engineered
with cranes,
steel.
Right?
Yeah. No, I saw that. And that's for noise attenuation, or
exactly. It's like an industrial building.
These are sitting on top of the shafts right now.
Yeah.
I saw that, and. I'm just kind of like back of the envelope trying to estimate the steel cost, and it was like insane. And for a temporary structure, it was insane.
They're going to rip it down at the end.
Yeah.
And so some other cities like Melbourne did this. And it's like when we come up with ideas on how to do things, we look at the highest cost places like Melbourne
and take their ideas.
Right. And so we're just, and you think of a place like Osgood Hall, like why does that need noise attenuation? Right. You know, it's there, we add requirement, as you said, and we don't. No one is going like, what is the cost like how many extra hospitals is this project costing, right?
The problem is once you get into the billions, people don't really know the difference between 1 billion and 100 billion. Like it just sort of sounds like monopoly money.
I think you're right, like the general public, but like a smart politician, and maybe that's what we're missing, does know the difference between a subway line or a subway line plus 5 hospitals.
Yeah.
It's way more ribbons to cut.
Or 3 subway lines instead of 1 subway line.
Or 3 subway lines.
Like if you're just on transit.
And I mean, part of the thing too with less expensive that people don't realize is it always directly correlates to speed of construction. Right. So like the example I trot out again and again is you compare the Crosstown with the Canada Line in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Both projects, P3s, both projects, same capacity. Canada Line was completed in like 3.5 years.
Yeah.
It is a full subway. It's not a tram.
Yeah.
And how did they do that faster? One, well, there's some things that are controversial. They had temporary foreign workers that helped with construction.
Yeah.
They brought in people from Italy and South America to do some of the tunneling work.
Sounds good.
Right? Yeah. Well, because you have all this other money to spend on social goods and stuff, right? It's like, what if the transportation wasn't...
You have to decide if the program is to deliver infrastructure or to employ people.
Right.
And those are like not always the same thing.
Well, that's where you get blocked up in Ontario, though, because our procurement rules, the relationships with
but again, like a smart politician would want, rather than egg on his face for a very slow and expensive project, would want the example I keep using, because I talk to people and they say like there's literally no incentive for politicians to care, but I don't know if that's true. Have you read The Power Broker, the Robert Moses biography? So
I've actually, people, if you ask people, have you read The Power Broker? They're like, yeah. And it's like, how many pages?
Yeah.
Right?
Two-thirds. He keeps across many mayors threatening to quit to get his way, and the mayors always fold.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, if you don't read, like, why are the mayors folding? Like, they're the mayor, they're elected, they could fire him. And the reason why they fold is because he delivers things they could be proud of and like wear as feathers in their cap. He delivers projects on time, on budget. You know, back then it was still quite expensive, but like much less than what it would be today. But like, there is value to a politician to have things get done and be seen as a politician who gets things done. So what are we missing? Why don't politicians care more?
It's everything, right? Like they need to. I think they need to get more into the nitty gritty. They need to deliver. They also need to just care about the quality of the stuff.
But is it not also fair to say that like most of the bang for your buck, at least in Canadian politics as I perceive it, is the announcement of the thing, acknowledging full well that the thing may or may not get completed, but when it does, you won't be the politician anymore. Right?
So it's like we've accepted that, though.
You know, like I announced the Ontario line, I get all the political credit for it. I'm not going to be here when it's finished. It'll be somebody else who's here when it's finished.
But that's the thing, is that like if we could move on fast timelines, then it's actually, if we could move on 3.5 year timelines, you actually could be delivering stuff.
Doug Ford's been premier for 8 years,
so he could have had if he actually was like full speed ahead. It's still conceivable that he could be premier when the Ontario line opens.
He might be premier forever.
Seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Well, there's no competition, right? But yeah, like getting these timelines down, and that is part of the cost. Right? So you're literally employing thousands of people for like years of additional time.
One story is that the reason why nobody cares is because we've gutted out the capacity of governments and these agencies in exchange for basically more of the work being completed by contractors and consultants. And therefore there's no in-house muscle to develop institutional knowledge and to develop like ownership and accountability and to do, like, how much of this do you think is that the fact that, like, I forget what the number was, but Metrolinx hires like, so many consultants to do like all the actual work?
I mean, I think it's a big part. Clearly, like there's just like a lot of examples where stuff done in-house is way more affordable. But it's even worse than it seems, because there are other places in the world that are really expensive, like Singapore and Australia. But I would suggest to people, go look at the renderings of the Ontario line stations, and then go look at like the stuff that they're building in those cities, right? Yeah. Like Sydney Metro, for example, it's like Foster and Partners and Sandstone subway stations.
Ours are quite utilitarian.
Yeah, so it's like it's so much worse than we think, because we're already paying the highest prices, but the end product is not nice.
Like the Eglinton Crosstown.
It's just not very nice.
And part of me says, I don't care about all the flair. I just want affordable, efficient, and like timely infrastructure. But if we're going to take 17 years building something,
it better be nice.
It better be nice.
Because like often, like I would want, like, if I think about the stations that serve me best, it's like the downtown stations that disappear under the building, some other building, and like plug into the path. Like I don't care what I just want it to be like accessible.
Yeah, the design flair is like what color tile. In the
platform. And like that to me is totally fine. But you want to pay the utilitarian prices,
right? Yeah, I mean, I think a big problem is that with the cost stuff, it's always this retroactive thing. So we already designed the thing, and then at the 11th hour, we're like, oh crap, this is way too expensive.
So we value engineer the like finishing material, but like all the important decisions are already made.
The expensive stuff is actually like how deep the station is, right? It's how many truckloads of dirt do we have to remove?
And again, there's a version of history of the Ontario line where we could have run it on Richmond and done cut and cover.
Or like the thing that John English actually brings up regularly, and I think it's kind of like the most beautiful thing is everyone talks about the Prince Edward Viaduct, right?
Yeah.
And how we had the forethought to put the second deck on it. How long have we known that there was going to be a subway on Queen Street?
Right.
Like, why are we putting utilities in the place? Like, if we were smart, we would be like, even as you build the adjacent buildings, putting the box of the tunnel together, right? So that you're like, oh, well, like most of this tunnel is done. Like the station structures are already kind of primed,
like pre-shoring and stuff.
Exactly. Like you could have done that. Right?
Well, we have this complaint often when we talk about housing, where like planning, the word planning is not like what planners actually do. They actually just kind of like nitpick and like kind of like
regulate,
push you. They regulate. Yeah, that's right. The regulators. Planning is what you're talking about. Is kind of like we know where the city's going.
Yeah.
What should we plan for the future?
Particularly on the infrastructure side. I mean, like one of the where this intersects a lot with our world of housing. I think of the Eglinton Crosstown, and particularly the east stretch of it, the Golden Mile, where over the last 5 to 10 years, there's I don't know, who knows how many of these buildings will get built, but like hundreds of high-rise building applications. I think on the premise that people just heard transit and they assume subway.
Yeah.
And so now you got all this density planned for a segment of new transit that will probably still lead to a lot of people needing to drive their car because it's going to be slow transit.
It's going to be slow.
And capacity.
So like, we're forcing planners like on the housing side to put people towards these new transit infrastructure hotspots like these MTSAs that we're putting around the city, but these are not delivering the same capacity of transit.
No, and I mean this is
MTSAs that we've.
This is something that's so crazy to me is that the MTSAs aren't, as far as I understand. I mean, I think they make a distinction maybe between light rail and subway, but they're not tuned to the capacity. Right. So like Dundas West should be like zoned for crazy amounts of density because it's actually like besides Union Station the highest capacity place.
You've got the
network.
up, you've got the go, you've got the subway, you've got the streetcar.
Like effectively like 3 or 4 subway lines worth of capacity, right? So, but then it's like some random stop on Finch. It's barely more than a bus.
That's right.
Right. So there should be you should actually like kind of distinguish between these.
Sure.
And then you should do the like BC model of like a radius around it, and ideally one that sort of fades into a pretty high like outside level of density. So we don't do any of these sensible things.
I want to go back to the caring question, because if that is kind of like underpinning a lot of these things, like, do you think it's a matter of just like financial incentives, like how jobs are tracked and how performance is rewarded? There's this idea, Tyler Cowan has this idea that like some cultures just care more about excellence than others, like the Japanese and Germans really care about excellence, and some other cultures don't. Like, how much of this is like could you tweak with policy versus how much of it is like, I don't know, there's something missing in our culture around like getting transit right because we all drive and live out of town.
I think we actually used to be pretty good, so I don't think it's a cultural thing. Like you look even, or maybe a culture shifted. Like the Shepherd subway, people complained a lot that it was really expensive, but again, if we could build for the prices we built the Shepherd subway, we'd be getting 5 times more transit, like possibly 10 times at the Ontario line prices, right? And so I think it comes down to like incentives ultimately, right? And sort of like the bureaucracies we built are so ill-equipped to deliver stuff. Like we just add agencies, we add plans, we have Metrolinx, but the creation of Metrolinx didn't lead to this sort of like elimination of the TTC. I'm not necessarily calling for that. But Metrolinx maybe should have like taken pieces of the TTC and then like TTC, but instead TTC still maintains like some internal capacity, right? So it's like there's this Waterfront East LRT project, and despite following this closely, is Metrolinx? I don't even know if Metrolinx is involved in that at all.
I'm not sure.
Well, and I don't want to misquote him, but I think
so much.
Our friend Eric Lombardi, who's running for the Ontario Liberal leadership, also has made the case that like transit infrastructure building capacity and transit operations are two very different core competencies, and we push these together, right? The TTC both builds and operates. The Metrolinx both builds and operates.
Two agencies build and operate.
Although, if I go back to the streetcar thing, you want, I guess, some overlap in knowledge sharing because the operations of the streetcar network would lead to these, like, capital expenditures and improvements to the network itself.
The other question, I don't know if this is politically feasible in Canada, but I'm curious around the world. Is there also an angle or a question around like public versus private ownership or combinations thereof?
I mean, for sure there is, right? Like the issue I think that comes from kind of like, you want the private sector to do more is you have to devolve powers to the private sector. People talk about Hong Kong, and Hong Kong's great, and people don't realize this. They all talk about the property, but Hong Kong runs an operating profit on the service, right? Like,
which is insane.
Which maybe is unique because the density is ludicrously high, right? But then MTR has like a lot of powers to do stuff, right? And it's like, I don't know that we'd be okay with, like, do you want Metrolinx or TTC to have like these crazy powers to like
the power to like kick homeless people off the train, like things that we're not willing to
take property and stuff, right? Like quite aggressively
and so on.
Yeah, so like,
but if you're talking about incentives, presumably those incentives have to be paired with some amount. I mean, what kind of power may vary around the world in the political circumstances, but you want them to be incentivized to do it, and you want them to be equipped with the right tools to be able to do it, right? So
the places that are best ultimately do it mostly publicly. I mean, like, they organize publicly and they have a competent private sector. I think like one of the examples I really liked was Turkey. Like in Turkey, it's the government runs and funds everything, but they have a really rich contractor base. Like, there's like thousands of contractors.
And is that because they build so much, it's developed this?
They build so much, but I think they design to be constructible,
right? And
they also package projects so that like more firms they actively incentivize the creation of more firms that could compete, right, for projects.
Seems like we do the opposite on Ontario.
Well, like, just think about like transit projects and think about the companies building them. You're like, is it a long list?
No,
right? It's not, right? And so you don't get the competition, and competition is like pretty. I mean, think about who makes all the trains in Canada, right? Like, almost every train in Canada is made by one company. And we just ordered new trains for Line 2, right? And we've had lots of problems with Alstom, right? Like, the streetcars, like, they delivered, it was Bombardier, but they bought them, so they buy their problems. They had all those problems.
Is this the Thunder Bay assembly?
Yeah. So it's like, are we going to punish them? Because like Alstom, they actually make good products in markets where they compete.
Where they have to.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, their products in Canada, they seem to eventually end up being decent. But, like, we basically do this thing where it's like there's jobs. And even the Australians, like, again, like, they make the same mistakes as us, but they're smarter about it. So I believe what they did in Melbourne is they nationalized the factory. And they said, like, whoever wins the contract, you got to build in the factory, but it's at least there's competition then on
the bids.
Right. So you're not saying, not only are we not going to have competition on, like, it has to be this company because they're the only ones that can employ those people. We recognize that, like, oh no, any company could like use the cranes and build trains, right? So even if we just try to be smart at the margins, we could get better outcomes, but we're not.
We're
right?
not doing that.
We don't care.
Let's I don't want to skip over Toronto too quickly, but I do want to take all this context and talk about Alto. Because there's a few things that jump out to me. Like, right now, one way to think about Mark Carney.
And let's explain what Alto is.
Yeah, so Alto, and I'll simplify. You can add some color and context. High-speed rail proposal. I think in its full form from Quebec City to Windsor, but I think right now we're really talking about Montreal to Toronto.
No, they're saying in their full form is Quebec City to Toronto.
Yeah.
Okay. So
we decided Montreal to Quebec rather than Toronto to Windsor.
Yeah.
We shifted that way.
Okay, so and I'll put that in the context of like a political moment right now where Mark Carney, at least in perception, seems to be a guy who wants to get things done. Wants to get things done by his words, quickly, faster than in generations.
100%.
This seems to be a project that I think most people, if you ask them, hey, would you like to have a faster train that connects big cities in Eastern Canada? Be like, yeah. I think the skepticism is always on, will it get done? At what price will it get done? And at what trade-offs are going to be made along the way? So if in this moment, it still seems to be like a forever project, like, I heard first construction maybe 2032 or something that. like if this is not the moment to build things quickly, like when is it possible to build things quickly? Maybe you can start even on your opinion of this project at a high level, because I know there was a lot of debate about this on Twitter. And my read of it is less about do people like the idea. It's more do people believe that the idea will happen, and how will it happen, right? So,
and they're right to, it's like it's not a infrastructure Canada, I mean, I think that I come at this from a few things. First of all, infrastructure, literally anywhere, it has problems, right? Like I think a big problem is we have become not forgiving of reasonable problems, right? And so an example of this I think of is I go to the REM in Montreal, right? And that project has been just raked over the coals in Montreal for being laden over budget. The problem is that we never seem to specify like the budget, like, what was the initial budget, right? Because so what we've done in Ontario as a reaction to being over budget on like the York subway extension is inflate the budget. And then what happens is you spend more and you still probably going to blow the budget, right?
I remember, just a quick point on that, we're going to be ahead of schedule on the Ring of Fire roads, despite it was promised 8 years ago, but it was promised with like a 12-year timeline. So we'll be ahead of schedule.
It's partially incentives and stuff that we don't seem to be very thoughtful about. So a big part is that, and it's also like how quickly do you deliver it? So like the REM in Montreal, it ended up going a few billion over budget. But because of the contracting model, actually the private partner, which is actually a public pension fund, ate the cost overruns, right? So it's actually like a very good news story. It was that project, which is like almost all done now. Like it's like 80 to 90%. In a few weeks, it'll be like 95% complete. It was proposed in 2016. The Eglinton Crosstown had 5 years previously, right? This project is like the first part of it opened before the Eglinton Crosstown. It was literally a glimmer in a politician's eye in 2016, right? So this thing has moved really fast. And I guess my point in saying this is that like we actually, like a big problem is that media in Canada is so Toronto-centric, and so people can just think of the Eglinton Crosstown. But actually, Toronto is the worst city in Canada at delivering infrastructure, and Vancouver and Montreal have actually been, when they have decided, like Vancouver's been building continuously, so that's good for them. Montreal hasn't, but the REM has gone well. So I think part of it is that like actually we had to have some competent stuff under our belts. The problem is that we just need to accept that projects are always probably going to be a bit late and a bit over budget, but we have to recognize that like that's okay as long as it's 10% over a reasonable budget.
That's right. It still comes down to like, I guess, global comparisons on the per kilometer.
And my skepticism, well, and actually I have a technical question that you'd probably have the answer to, is like, one, if you take VIA, our current rail system in Canada and its current infrastructure, the lines that it runs on, to what extent is there potential for improvement on our existing rail system, or is that capped for some technical reason? And then two, in the process of designing a new system like Alto, what are the odds that we end up compromising so much that it ends up not really feeling like a high-speed rail? It just sort of feels like a slightly faster train.
So I think I'll take your second point first. I think that if anything, I'm concerned that we're going a little too aggressive on the trying to make it super good. But like from everything I can tell, it is going to be, if we build the thing as it's planned. And I mean, like we are, like it's pretty serious. Like we're getting firms are involved. There's like a big money being spent now. If anything, I'm concerned that they're kind of they're building huge tunnels and stuff. Like they're really trying to focus on speed. And so I think, if it gets built, I hope it gets built. I hope we get some high-speed rail. I think, it's like a thing that developed countries should have. Is that it'll be fast. The bigger issue is kind of like, how could we improve existing VIA? I think that is a rational question. And, like we could improve it a lot. The big issue is that CN essentially owns owns the infrastructure, right? And VIA Rail is not equipped. It's just not like, it's not an engineering capable agency. So like they own some of the lines, and have they like made those like primo really good railways? No. Right? They're not making the stuff they own really good. And honestly, the trains they bought, the ones they procured, billions of dollars, having a ton of issues. Like you can see, like the brand new trains they bought are having tons of issues. And so they're not an organization equipped to do big capital projects. So that's a big problem. You can upgrade the existing lines. Trains used to go way faster. And I think that like there is an argument to be made that like that's a rational approach. For me, the problem is that the more aggressive you are with like getting that to be better within the context of like our existing, like you have to solve a lot of problems. And then by the time you solve all of these like problems in terms of like the bureaucracies we have and capital competencies, it's like, why aren't you just doing like the cost difference is probably actually not going to be that big
versus a new line.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but and again, this is superficial without me understanding all the politics and the engineering and technicalities. But one, we are building a completely new
for sure.
A route. Right?
Yeah.
So like the routes for Via and the route for the proposed Alto route are completely different.
Yeah.
So that means new rail, new expropriated lands, new everything. I'm also curious, like in the context of fast, we have let's say Toronto to Montreal. I don't know the exact times, but I always think of it as about 5 hours.
5 hours
on Via. So we're talking
if it runs on time.
If it runs on time,
which it doesn't.
And we're talking maybe 3 hours in Alto.
It would be less than that probably.
Two and a half to 3. Yeah. And also in the context of like for Toronto, we're talking about a Billy Bishop Airport expansion. People can fly to Montreal. So when you like factor all that in, is there like a really strong economic case for?
I think there is, and a big part of it is that there's the speed improvement, but the capacity improvement is way bigger. So
compared to planes, for example.
Well, for sure compared to planes, but even compared to existing Via, right? Existing Via is like 8 trains a day, right? If you're talking about high-speed rail, right? If you're talking about like in Europe, 8 trains an hour, right? So like 20x the capacity. The trains would probably be bigger. Flights, it's just not comparable, right? Like a single train is going to carry 3 times a 777, right? And Billy Bishop, those planes are going to be 150, 200 passengers, right? So there's all of that. It's airport expansion is also expensive, right? And Billy Bishop, the thing is, now they need to go to Union Station, but it's not at Union Station, and so that creates a transportation problem as well, right? Because it's easy to get to Union. It's kind of annoying to get down to Billy Bishop. I know it's not that far, but when
it's not well connected.
You have to add that to every train, right? So I think these are the big comparisons, and it's also the highway. Like ideally, if this thing works well, it takes a lot of people. It's probably not going to take people off the highway over the long term, but it will prevent people who
more
like
people
that
from going on.
New highway use, right? So
it's planning for the future in a sense.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think that in terms of the economic case, right? Like Canada is a service economy. Making it easier for people and ideas to be exchanged is good. I think a big problem is that a lot of this is about sort of perspective stuff, right? It's not, people imagine it as like, I don't go to Montreal that often. So like, what is the value in this? And it's like, because it makes it possible for you to go to Montreal much easier, right? And for new businesses to spin up that couldn't exist, right? For employment markets to get way bigger, like people could so many people are on like 2-day-a-week hybrid.
How many stops would there be between Toronto and Montreal?
Like 6.
And which are those?
Peterborough, Ottawa, Laval.
How do you feel about the stops that have been?
I think it's questionable. I think some of this stuff.
Well, Laval seems the most questionable to me, just because it's so close to Montreal.
I think it's good to have stations on this in the suburbs, because what that means is it's like you can kind of like.
It becomes a commuter line as well.
But also like if you live in Scarborough, right? It's a huge disincentive to using the train that you have to go all the way back to Union, which is a hike, right? And then go. So having something on the edge means that people can kind of converge there, right?
Did I see correctly a headline that suggested that the Alto might not terminate at Union?
Yes. So that's like something that would be a critical problem in my personal view.
That it not end up at Union?
Yeah, and the reason I say that is that like
Union is pretty like tight, right? In terms of its capacity.
I don't really think so.
Okay.
When you look at like, so I was thinking about this. Like, if I had to meet with Alto and talk and be like, this is why you guys need to go there. I looked at Tokyo Station, and Tokyo Station has like twice as much horizontal space as Union. But the thing is, like, when you're spending this much money, you can double stack. You can just go elevated above the existing railway. And I think that you could tunnel too. Let's not. Those guys seem like they really want to like dig a lot of holes. I don't think that's a good idea. It's complicated and dangerous and expensive. But you just build elevated above the existing tracks.
What else is being considered? Downsview?
I think. Well, people have talked about that. I think East Harbor is kind of the thing that a lot of people are talking about. That wouldn't be the. There are worse locations.
The reason why Union to me is also so important is if you think about how many Torontonians have access to Union within 30 minutes.
Exactly.
It's a much larger number
than anywhere else.
Yeah. And like ultimately that's what you want. Is
like feels a bit out there.
Yeah, because and again, like the difference it might be like 10% as many people could get to Downsview in 30 minutes as Union. Like a huge difference.
But it's even like so East Harbor. I think some people online have said like, how does this compete with the travel time of driving? And it's actually like that isn't an issue if you're at Union.
Right.
But if you are in some random location,
you have to get there.
That's
you
right.
have to get there.
That's
And
right.
then you become an airport, right?
That's right.
The thing that's good about Union is a lot of people actually already live close to Union because it's so dense, right?
Yeah.
And then if you need to travel to Union, there's actually
There's
GO
a million
trains.
ways to get to Union.
It's fast.
Yeah.
The second you go to East Harbor, it's a tax on every trip of like 15, 20 minutes.
Totally. And that matters.
Is very expensive.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And people don't want to change. You got a suitcase or
And
something,
it's the
you don't want to
primary
get
reason why Union is not locked in just like these space constraints.
I think that's the main thing is we see it as a space constraint. You know, the reality is that our station is huge relative to it's just that we are not used to running many trains in it. Right. Like they're just not. If it was in Europe, you could run as many trains as we're planning in Union for like a quarter of.
But presumably, like I don't know how all this like correlates, but Metrolinx is talking about increased GO frequency on certain lines. All of that comes into Union, right?
Yeah, so that wouldn't be like it would not be a problem.
And even then, like I would just like keep, to the extent you have to, just keep expanding Union.
Well, to your point, stacking it.
Stacking
you can't expand it widthwise. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's constrained by the city.
Yeah. I just mean like the space for like everything else you need, like the Shake Shacks and so on.
And stuff. You just dig more levels. But I mean, that's what they would do in other countries. I mean, the thing is. It needs to go to Union. That's absolutely critical. Not going to Union would be a huge, huge, huge mistake. But like again, many cities like they would already have like we are in a really lucky place. You look at New York, right? Originally, Grand Central, the tracks were all exposed, right? Park Avenue is like built on top, and all the skyscrapers and stuff. We're young city.
Yeah.
Like you see, CIBC Square has gone up. And like that will continue in perpetuity, right? The tracks will slowly become underground because we build over it. And so it's like we're actually in a lucky position where we can still maneuver. Right. And so what we should see is Metrolinx should be getting really aggressive about air rights. Like, yeah, you can build, but you need to like leave room for maybe a second level of tracks.
Did they do that with CIBC?
They left room for electrification.
Okay,
right? but not more tracks, which could be fine. You could end right at CIBC Square. You're basically at Union. But these are things we need to think about. This is the forward planning, right? That we don't do very well. And so,
to your point, like the UP terminus station is really like outside of Union.
Exactly.
So you can do the same thing on the other side.
100%.
Like an Alto terminus station that is connected by path to Union, but it's effectively like an appendage.
Exactly. And this is like these are the sensible things we should be talking about. The big problem here is that we have a really screwed up regulatory environment in Canada. The railways are like there's like a mix of federal and provincial, right? So Metrolinx is provincial, Alto is federal, and they don't have to play nice. And in any country where this stuff works reasonably, there's like one agency and it's a common carrier basically. It's like the rails themselves would be owned by one agency, and then there would be another agency that runs trains, right? They run some high-speed trains, run some local trains, and what this has enabled in Europe is this open access thing. So private companies and also literally the national carriers from other countries will come and compete, right? And because of the way we've structured this, it's like a giant federal P3 that locks us into a monopoly with this operator. Paige Saunders did a great video on this for CBC. But like, what you want is you want to build the infrastructure, you want to build the cell towers, and then have whoever wants can compete, right? You throw the pool cube between them and say, go at it, guys.
And why don't we do that? Like, is it because the P3 operator that we give this monopoly to, they're like fronting some of the cash?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and if government is good at anything, it's having a low cost of capital. Yeah.
So take that constraint.
Right. So that's a huge, huge thing is you pay more upfront for that infrastructure, but then you can you have one of my great fears with this project. I'm still supportive, but I'm afraid that it's going to end up like the Eurostar in the UK, which is like really cool. Like, oh, I can go to Paris from London, but they run the tunnel. The capacity is like it's not. They built the Channel Tunnel, huge expense, and they don't use it to its full capacity because the incentive is to run really high ticket prices. It's like the 407, right? With infrastructure, the kind of most profitable thing to do is like not fully utilize it. It's to charge a really high rate, and then like people can go super high speeds and stuff. But you don't maximize that, and it seems like what we could be walking into is like you get really fast high speed rail at Montreal, but it's only like 10% cheaper than a flight type of thing, right? Which would make a lot of money, but it wouldn't be like beneficial for society.
Wouldn't unlock the economic advantage that
exactly.
Yeah, I've got to say one of the so of course like the Conservative Party came out against Alto, and one of the things that like I didn't love about their messaging is I think like the the story you can tell on why you oppose it is like we have no confidence this will be done on time or on budget, and not just on time or on budget, on a reasonable budget, even on an inflated budget. We have like we just don't think that this makes sense until we could prove that we've improved our state capacity.
Yeah.
That message was kind of muddled with like, also there's this rural community that doesn't want like Main Street to be cut in two, and it just kind of like signals, frankly, this political calculus of like rural NIMBYism and so on. And I thought that was disappointing because I vote conservative, and one of the reasons why I quite like Pierre as a leader is because it was all about like let's get the gatekeepers out of the way. So I think that was a little bit muddled. If you had to guess, just how much of the political conflict that we should foresee here, how much have you looked into like the reception along these rural lines? Do you think that will be a major issue?
I mean, it's one of those things where I think it's like a lot of things. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember the Davenport Diamond, like over on the Barrie line. They basically it was in the junction. Okay. Basically, they're going to elevate this rail line for GO trains.
The junction here, like this neighborhood?
like over there, right?
Okay.
And they had to build this big elevated structure, right? And I just remember before I'd moved to Toronto watching the consultations, people were losing their minds, right? And like you haven't heard of it, right? Because like once it was built, no one cared again, right?
Sorry, where is this?
This is the one that runs sort of like parallel to Symington, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When you're in the park off of Symington, you can see the like double stack.
Okay,
exactly.
That's right. Okay,
and so it's like so many things are like that, right? Where it's people when they have a voice to complain about something, like they will, but the reality is like how much you really care, right? Like people have highways near them,
and in fact, like to the extent that the same people who don't want Main Street in Nowhere, Ontario to be cut in half, they're the same people that like probably correctly estimate that this is not going to be done in their lifetimes. So like who cares?
Yeah, right. So but I mean my problem with it is that I see myself as an independent, and I like some of the conservative policies and I dislike other ones. It's just that you want to build stuff too, right? You want to like build pipelines and stuff. And totally. The same dysfunctions that prevent you from building a railway are going to prevent you from building housing and pipelines and all these.
That's why I thought this anytime you're dealing with horizontal infrastructure and you're crossing many property lines and jurisdictions, you have to just take a stance that like it's just important. Yeah. And you could have these like very fair critiques on cost, and you could demand some accountability and like some early signs that like a lot of these things will be done smartly. But I think as soon as you get into like this community doesn't want it, then you have very little authority on these other horizontal infrastructure projects.
And the thing is on the cost issue, right? Maybe this is on Alto for not communicating it well, but like the consortium they got to do it is the consortium that built the rim, right? So it's actually like the A team, so to speak. Right. They're like conservatives should love this, and like I think it's kind of on CDPQ for not selling it enough, but it's actually an incredible model. It's literally like this tiny team at a pension fund who coordinates and does the things that like a giant transit organization or ministry would do.
Who makes the decision on like Union Station versus not, like ultimately?
Well, that, I think, in the ideal world would just be rationally decided. I guess Metrolinx makes that decision, right? Which is ultimately the province.
Because Metrolinx needs to tie into Alto.
And I mean, they control that infrastructure. Right. So I think
presumably this could be, like you'd probably see it coming with like pressure from the federal government. There's a whole bunch of dollars getting sent to the province for other infrastructure projects. Say, hey, we have to.
So ultimately, it's the Prime Minister, and then maybe the Minister of Transportation, and then the Premier, and okay.
Now, is there any other, like the other political dynamic that you hear on this is that this is a very Eastern Canada centric infrastructure project. Is there any other place in the country where it would make sense to look at a high-speed rail service?
It's a good question. As someone who grew up in the West, in the biggest province in the West, the one that no one ever remembers, that doesn't want to leave the country. I mean, like it's a political mistake from all political parties that they haven't been talking about like Alberta seriously, right? Clearly some sort of, get Brightline to do it, right? Like get those guys to, they like for what they like. I don't think they need a full electric 300 kilometer per hour like Brightline in Florida. Like they built along highways and stuff. Like bring those guys in, partner with Alto or whatever.
This is specifically Edmonton, Calgary.
It would be perfect. It's really easy. It's pretty flat, right? There's already train lines. There's right of way, right? There's like a highway. They build right next to the highway. It is purely a political mistake, and it's like
then you can make the case that, hey, this is a national high-speed rail strategy.
Exactly.
Not a Montreal-Toronto strategy, right?
So there's that. I think that just be smart politically. Yeah. But then also at some point people do have to recognize that most people live near Montreal, Toronto, right? Like Alberta is...
in defense of, if we're talking about planning, in defense of Alberta, it's a huge amount of population growth in Alberta over the last decade, and probably for the foreseeable future. And so if you're laying out, I think it's very possible that Alberta is double its size in 25 years.
Right? No, that's reasonable.
And so you got to start making those decisions at some point.
And,
right?
and to be fair, someone brought this up to me. Alberta actually does have like a passenger rail master plan, because Danielle Smith formerly ran a restaurant out of a rail car. She's actually very interested in trains. Yeah. Kind of crazy lady anyways, but I appreciate the passenger rail master plan is actually that's sensible. That's actually how you should have a plan. You just kind of build piece by piece, a lot of regulatory clarity and stuff. Actually that's probably how we should be doing high-speed rails. It should be part of a master plan. We go to Windsor and this year and we'll have you can plug into a line to Kitchener here, and we're going to start acquiring right of way and stuff. Certainly not approaching in the most competent way, but that's what I want from Pierre. Is I want how would you do this better?
That's right.
Because
they'll just say no.
Vietnam is going to have high speed rail. Morocco has high speed. Uzbekistan,
much poorer countries,
right? And I do really think this is on some level. Don't you want to be able to just go to Montreal whenever you want at a pretty reasonable cost, efficiently? It is better than flying or driving. I think once you get to that realization, it's okay, so how do we deliver this? And they need to say how they deliver it, because I think it is relevant to all of these other things.
I guess the other layer of politics in Alberta is people are probably not quite ready to hear about a rail line if we can't get a pipeline built, right? They're one infrastructure problem at a time.
Yeah, but I mean we have to walk and chew gum, right? I think it's critical, and I mean
I did want to. I don't want to. I know we've been talking for a while, so I don't want to go too off track. But there's one project provincially that I'm curious about and self-interested in.
Yeah.
The province has been talking about Go 2.0.
Yeah.
There's the expansion part of that, and then there's a specific. I don't know what they're calling it. The Midtown line.
Yeah.
So that Midtown line, for context, as we understood it on the existing CN line that is only used for cargo right now, that does not go to Union, that effectively cuts north of Dupont and Dundas here in the junction. Can you talk about that, your views on that project, the feasibility of a project like that, reusing existing rail line to just add Go?
I think a big problem is that there's just all these different strategies, and it's not there's not a coherent single plan. And Metrolinx has a strategy, but then the Ministry of Transportation has a strategy that's separate from Metrolinx's. There's promises about the Milton line, which is relevant because the Milton line is basically the Midtown line west of Toronto, right? And so there's all this politics involved. It is obvious that you have this rail line through the middle of Toronto.
It should be used.
It should be used, right? The important question is how important is the freight line, right? The freight line's main function is that CP has a huge yard in Scarborough, right? And they don't really have customers along the line because it's not really industrial anymore, right? So this is just the thoroughfare for them to get to that yard. There was already a train line north of Toronto that was built, and that's what opened up the GO network, because CN used to run through downtown and have all their yards in downtown, right? And so they could be moved onto that northern line and access that yard from the eastern side.
Take cargo out of the city.
Exactly. And they'd be going through kind of York region near the 407, right? You'd have to do some sort of deal because that's CN's line, but they already share tracks in BC, for example. They have these deals where they share tracks to maximize efficiency, right? So there are deals that could be done. You have to want it. But then also,
and is the right of way not big enough in the existing Midtown whatever line to just double the rail?
I believe
there are choke points.
There are choke points, through Rosedale, right? And it's just do you want to try to add 2 tracks to Rosedale, right?
Especially in Rosedale,
right? Part of it too is that there's some places where if you had to add tracks, you'd have to tunnel, and that would get expensive, right? And so
and there's a bunch of new development getting built on both sides of these tracks. You think about these giant crash walls on the north side of Dupont, where there's condos getting built.
But I think it's just a question of do you think we should have trains full of oil going through the middle of
when they don't need
the most populated city in the country when they don't need to, right? And also there's all this land in Scarborough. And if you look on satellite imagery, CP is ripping up the tracks progressively.
Right.
So at some point, like, clearly would make sense. The issue is it's not like downtown land.
Yeah.
So remediation, so maybe it doesn't pencil.
Yeah.
But like that land should be housing or something.
Sure.
And then, have the CP yard in like the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So
like,
putting aside the like
airport land.
The lack of like coordination or cohesive strategy between the Ministry of Transportation and Metrolinx, on its own merits, you think this Midtown line makes sense?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you've got all the density, right? It goes right past the junction,
and presumably cost efficient because the
existing.
You have to build stations.
No tunneling.
Well, I mean, I like to remind people that the Ottawa O train, the original one, it was a 5-station line.
It ran from like the airport north.
It didn't go to the airport initially, but it was kind of like the Up Express type of service. They built it for $25 million.
Wow.
they bought
$25 million.
I don't think we could buy a train car for $25 million.
Yes, they bought the trains. They were like, Deutsche Bahn had had ordered too many.
Yeah.
So they bought some trains.
That's like one Stag and Dough with Doug Ford. When it's done.
The ticket machines were just parking meters that they had like repurposed. They just built like concrete pads for the platforms.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing, like you could totally do that on the Midtown line.
Yeah.
Run a train every 25 minutes. It would be great. You go from the junction to like DuPont on the subway or Summerhill. You could go to Scarborough really easily. It would be sort of like an express version.
Like the other way I understood it was it takes people out of the need to go into the core.
Exactly.
To transfer.
And off of line 2 specifically. Yeah.
Well, totally. And the big thing too is that like it's even more relevant because Eglinton, ideally that eastern part would have been really fast and high capacity.
That's right.
It's not going to be, right? We know
so this
that
would
now.
help.
This would actually
support that.
The Midtown line goes basically right to the end of where we're extending line 2.
Right.
So you could kind of have it cut diagonally across the city.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic. It would be. I don't think people get on GO trains enough. They're so fast, right?
I take the GO train. I commute in.
It's like
not only are they fast, they're very pleasant.
Yeah, you'd go from the junction to Scarborough in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. It would be fantastic.
Any GO train station inside the city of Toronto is often the fastest way to get to
100%.
To downtown.
Right?
Where you're like Agincourt or Mount Dennis or whatever. It's just like they are incredibly direct and incredibly fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that like there's a bunch of development going along this line. And it's crazy that we're not talking about like the junction is kind of what cities have, like the nice neighborhood or like the up and coming neighborhood, and obviously that should be on rapid transit. And it's like there's no plan to connect the junction to rapid transit.
Yeah.
Or like I used to live,
or like Galleria, which is a bunch of density.
I used to live at DuPont and Christie.
Yeah,
right. And I would walk to the subway.
Yeah,
it would it's like a 20-minute walk either way. If there could be a station right there.
Yeah,
perfect. There's a giant parking lot right behind the Loblaws, right?
Exactly, right. Like all of it, you have space, you have the tracks, you have all this
stuff. And right here where we are in the junction at like Dundas and Keele, effectively, you've got that giant diamond core development. You've got the industrial land on the
all the
west
stockyards
side,
are like planned for development.
No, it's
tons of opportunity.
It's super obvious. It makes a ton of sense, which is exactly why you would.
And
expect
it does also feel politically. It's the type of project that you could foreseeably see a politician announce, fund, and complete within their term of office.
100%. And that's what's so crazy is that with the Milton line. And the thing is, it combines with Milton line. So you could do them individually, but the thing is, like CP's line kind of goes snakes through Mississauga, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to relocate them, you get it all at once, right?
Yeah.
And what was amazing was they actually basically they came public with the deal, and the deal was CP basically said, hey, like you can do this, but you have to pay $5 billion, and that's the cost of like creating a fully separate set of tracks through Mississauga. And even $5 billion is a really high price, but like that is like 3 times the length of the Ontario line.
Yeah, even at $5 billion, it's worth
a sixth of the price, right?
Yeah.
So it's like and that just shows we're not motivated by cost. We're when we should be, because like these are low cost projects. And the thing that's great about railways, and it's the same with the streetcars, once you put these things in, you have that asset forever, right? And it can grow.
You can keep optimizing.
It can scale in a way that roads can't, right? Like the 401 has like a quarter of the capacity of a subway line.
Yeah.
And the subway line had that capacity.
Until we tunnel it.
The subway line had that capacity from the first day you built
That's
it.
Right.
The 401 you had to spend to expand it. Right?
Yeah.
And in fact, above grade, as we know with GO trains, you could have like double-decker trains. So you
have
could
double-decker trains. You can much more easily add new stations.
Yeah.
Right. So you could imagine on this
like Mount Dennis.
Exactly. You imagine on a line like this that. Yeah, like developers actually could conceivably fund stations because they're not huge underground structures.
Totally.
Right? So it's just like it's the kind of transit we should build, because it's not only high capacity and inexpensive, but it's scalable, right? In a way that like road infrastructure won't.
So maybe we end on this. We talked a little bit a couple of weeks ago about Metrolinx generally. I think you're a little bit optimistic about Metrolinx. You're maybe a little bit optimistic about Michael Lindsay than you had at Metrolinx, and in regional rail generally, maybe more than you are about the TTC. This does seem like to be like somewhat of a bright light through this provincial government, and maybe just a little bit on that. Like, are you seeing good things from the new leadership? Are you seeing a path to 50-minute service, which would make it kind of like not
subway,
just
basically
a subway with like a more comfortable subway with again fewer homeless people peeing on the seats? Is this a bright light in your mind? Like, hopefully,
unless that brings homeless people onto the go, which I'll be unhappy about. But
hopefully, the mayor takes all your ideas on the streetcar, and if not this mayor, the next one. Are we doing at least the right sort of things on this kind of like Go network regional rail?
Well, maybe just like step back for a second. Like, it is actually like the province, like to their great credit on transit, I actually have almost nothing I can fault them on, because not only are they doing all this subway expansion, which is like basically the amount that a lot of like European and Asian cities are doing nowhere else in North America. It's just we're paying like 5 times more for it.
You could fault them on that.
Sure.
It's
a minor detail,
sure.
Right? And they also did the fare integration.
And these are 100-year assets. In their defense, it's sort of like it's expensive,
totally.
but
and part of it is, I think, like my understanding, and this is a technical detail, is basically the way that it can be justified is that now the province owns an asset, and they can basically say, well, you couldn't have built it. Like, this asset simply costs that much to build.
Yeah.
Right.
So sort of their balance sheet doesning move because cash goes out, asset goes in.
And the asset is worth, clearly, like, it was a very nice asset. So it's worth so they're doing all this good stuff. They did the fare integration, which is what brings Go and turns it into a subway, because if you have to pay, you don't want to have to pay more. You want to freely go between the different systems. On Metrolinx, I mean, it's a morass, right? Like, they had the crosstown, they've had different leadership and stuff. Michael Lindsay is now the CEO, came in from Infrastructure Ontario, right? It's like, it's a real beast, but like, it seems like they're headed in the right direction. Like, they seem to be trying to bring more stuff in-house, which is big. The Go and Deutsche Bahn thing, I think that kind of died before he got there. I was a little sad that I was pretty sad that died.
What was Deutsche Bank? What was their role going to be?
They were basically, Deutsche Bahn was going to come in and they were going to basically bring their expertise to running the system, right? So they were literally going to, like, right now we plan stuff for this really complicated system with like Excel spreadsheets, and they were like bringing like the proper software and stuff, and also like we have 3 people on every Go train. So think about how that limits and how that the cost of running more trains scales.
3 conductors, or
you have like a guy in the middle, and there's 2 people at the front. So
and what's like best in class?
Would be like, well, best in class be the 0.
Autonomous.
Copenhagen it has a system kind of like Go. And they have 1 person. And they're going to 0. Right. And so it's like, it's a long way out because you got to get rid of the crossings and stuff. But like, that would be what we should be moving towards, right? And think about it. Even if you just got it 1 person, you could run 3 times as many trains for the same staffing cost, right? So that would be good. So we are moving towards these things. It seems like lessons are being learned. Lindsay has been like more transparent than Metrolinx has traditionally been. He's been like giving. They provided a graphic that was pretty good recently. They kind of said like, here's a Go network. Here's the projects we need to build to enable more service, right? So all of this is good, and he seems to be. He cares about the cost of stuff, etc. Like,
sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I'd love your thoughts while you're talking on the political side. How's the Ministry of Transportation been? Is it the right people on that side?
I guess they hired the right guy, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think they hired the right guy. I mean, I think that the last guy was also the right guy for the time. Like, it's good to have the last guy for his problems was like a rail guy. So like, they got a guy in who was like, okay, guys, you gotta wear like safety equipment when you do heavy construction and stuff, and like, no, like you don't turn that upside down. Like, that's not how trains work. So like, we got the train guy to like sort the basics out. Now we have like Michael Lindsay is like a procurement guy. He's like a procurement wonk, right? Which is clearly like we need that, right? That's like a big part. I mean, his job is literally procuring like billions of dollars of transit, right? And which we struggle with. So he seems like the right guy, and from what I can tell, like, he's been posting on like LinkedIn and stuff about like, oh, he's like out on the network. Like, so often we hire these leaders. Like, I think of the TTC CEO. He's still early, but it's a visibility, right? It's like, you're being paid a lot of money, public, like, tax dollars. I'm okay with you being paid a lot of money, but you have to perform.
That's right.
Right? And so it's like, you have to be.
We want value for dollar.
You have to. Like, the thing I appreciate is like Michael Lindsay. he's been on so many interviews, like where he'll be with the premier and it's like he's taking questions, he's answering, right? The CEO of the TTC, maybe I missed him. I haven't seen him.
Yeah.
There's been all these problems with the subway, the streetcars, all these things. As like he's not. And then this was the problem with the last guy who ran the TTC.
Are there the other thing you could say about the CEO of the TTC is you have these like great ideas that could be implemented, as we mentioned, at marginal or no cost, and it's not happening. Are there similar like very obvious things that should be happening on Go that aren't happening, or are we mostly doing what we should be doing? It's just slow.
That's my big thing with Metrolinx is it feels like they're doing that stuff.
Okay.
Right? Like their signs are way better. Like if you actually go and you objectively look at the signs on the Go train, they're just way better.
Yeah.
They kind of like they're clear, they're well designed, they're consistent. They actually go and switch the signs everywhere instead of like, oh, that sign's from like 100 years ago, right? And so no, they're doing the good stuff. And whenever I have a complaint, I feel like a year later it's like, oh, they fixed it, right? And so, whereas TTC is like, I had a complaint 10 years ago, they probably made it worse, right? And so, no, I think Metrolinx is good, and I think it's good to have that competition dynamic. Like, it's literally a lot of cities have this where they have multiple, and they kind of compete, right? And so Metrolinx right now is like the Go trains are reliable, fast. TTC's not. It creates pressure on the TTC.
Does Metrolinx own UP?
They do, yeah. So they have that. I think this competition dynamic is really healthy, right? Like it creates an incentive. They're going to run the Ontario line. So TTC, we didn't mention this before. They're running Finch and Eglinton, and like not very well, right? And so they're going to run Ontario.
Metrolinx is going to run Ontario line?
Yeah, well, actually, Metrolinx has a private partner that will run Ontario line. So that's kind of like best practice would be you build the infrastructure, and then the private partner is responsible for it for 30 years. And then once you've made sure that nothing's falling apart,
then you hand it over.
You take it over. Yeah.
My understanding is that a lot of this responsibility, especially on the construction side, shifted after Shepherd.
Yeah.
But Shepherd, you mentioned, was actually
after York.
Oh, okay, so who built Shepherd?
Shepherd is TTC.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So TTC, but Shepherd was actually built, at a pretty good price. And so because what I'm hearing from you is Metrolinx is better set up for various reasons than TTC is, but at least on the construction side, everything's kind of exploded since Metrolinx took over.
Well, it's not true that it's exploded since they took over because TTC did do York, and the reason Metrolinx took over is because York was way more expensive than Shepherd. I think the issue was TTC had the expertise, but then after Shepherd, it was a huge. And those people literally went to like Hong Kong instead. Because
we stopped building and people just leave. Yeah. So there's something to be said about just like don't stop building. Because you just need to retain.
Like Vancouver has done much better. Yeah. And they are like every 5 years there's new projects.
Right,
and Toronto is big enough that like we're doing simultaneously a lot of projects. And something I've heard, and this is a fair excuse, part of the reason our costs are so high is because like the entire latent construction industry capacity Metrolinx is using up. Like if you ride through East Harbor, there's like 100 cranes. Right. It's like they are employing a huge number of people.
That doesn't excuse some of these design decisions, but I hear you on that constraint. Yeah.
So I think that the thinking about these dynamics is really important, and Metrolinx does seem better. And part of it is just capacity too, right? Like TTC is City of Toronto, and City of Toronto is so parochial. They don't have any interest in anything beyond the City of Toronto.
Yeah.
But like, if you want to be efficient at building something, you want a high volume, right? So if like Metrolinx is doing Ottawa and they're doing Mississauga, like there's going to be more projects to work on,
more
so
reps.
they can maintain exactly.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, shift the capacity as projects sort of pick up and slow down.
Which you want.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't get a chance to get into it today, but I do want to highlight it just because to your point about like the amount of opportunity in Toronto, you wrote a great Substack about the opportunities in Scarborough. I think we'll probably go way too long if we go into that, but I think it's worth checking out for people that want to dive into that because Scarborough's like, to me, this sort of like transit desert where you have like an enormous number of people, an enormous amount of potential for like upzoning and development, but like no transit options to get people into the city. So check out that Substack. Anything else you wanted to?
No, I mean, we should talk about this more because we talk so much about housing, but it's so obviously interlinked. I think we just need to have you back.
Yeah, totally.
Congestion pricing, highways,
congestion pricing, autonomous cars. Maybe we make that like a part two. There's a lot to talk about there.
I mean, there's.
I'd love to get into Waymo. Right? Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah, maybe over Olivia Chow's dead body, but that might be coming in October.
No, I don't know. I have one friend who says the right move for her is to oppose interspeeches, but then like actually approve it. Right. So maybe that's what's happening. Yeah. Anyway, let's do a part two maybe sooner rather than later because this was so interesting. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for being here.